All right, Rabbi, say good morning. Begin by thanking our sponsors, our Talmud Torah sponsors. First of all, to thank our new Talmud Torah sponsor, Baruch Meir and Rina Dubin. Thank you for your sponsorship of all the shiur and midrashos this month. A beautiful dedication. May Hashem continue to protect our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael, and may all of our children remain safe and complete their year of learning with a deep connection to the land and Hashem's Torah. Truly beautiful. Thank you. To Naftoli and Chava Tilson from Eretz Yisrael, also dedicating all the shiurim and drashos this month with a special thank you to Naftali's friend Benjamin Wohl for introducing him to the Daf. May Hashem bless us all to finish the Daf Yomi cycle together and celebrate with the Sim together in Eretz Yisrael with much hakara satov. Amen. To thank Marc Karstaedt for dedicating all of his shiurim and drashos this month. I should give out of New York, for in memory of his mother Chana Bat Shraggai, zichron livracha, and to thank our week of learning sponsors Leah Soul in memory of her mother Marguerite Streit in commemoration of her 9th yard site, and our week of learning sponsor Jeff and Karen Cohn in commemoration of the yard site of Meir Axman, Meir ben Mordechai zichron livracha. We hope that on the merit of our Talmud Torah, the neshama should have an aliyah, the families in nechama, there should Amir Hashem be peace in Eretz Yisrael, and our children together with all of our brothers and sisters who are there. Should Amir Hashem have a Kadosh Baruch Hu's shmira, His divine providence, His watchfulness, Amir Hashem in these days ahead. All right, to say, let us begin. So we are picking up Amir Hashem today's daf. Islamic Days 32. So a lot to do today. A beautiful, beautiful Gemara ahead of us. Hopefully a little bit of halacha as well if we have time. So we are picking up today's daf, as I mentioned before, Islamic Days 32. And we are picking up Emir Hashem Amrulay. We kind of left off in the middle of a discussion over here. It's a 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 lines up from the bottom on 31b. Says the Gemara. Amrulay Rabbanan Rapapa. So the Rabbanan ultimately said to Rabbanan, so remember again, we're in the middle of a discussion over here regarding the kiddushin, right? Regarding the washing of the hands and feet. And again, a couple of machlokim are happening over here. Machlokis number one is in general with that first tefillah. Also remember again, we've already established that how many immersions in the mikvah are there in Yom Kippur? 5, right? And how many kiddushin raglayim? 10. So remember again, we pointed out that out of those 5, 4 of the 5 are the same in that they are done where? Little chazara, Beis HaParva. Good, excellent. Meaning they're done by the mikvah Beis HaParva, which is in the Kodesh. The first immersion is done by the Shar HaMayim, where it has a mikvah ultimately again that's in the chol. So we have a couple of things happening over here. So number one, is there a kiddush adayim v'raglayim before that first immersion? That's kind of question number one. The Mishnah did not mention it explicitly. The shaila, does it exist or not? And issue number 2 is in general the order of kiddush adayim v'raglayim. Does kiddush adayim v'raglayim happen? Remember, here's what we know. Generally, you're sanctifying your hands and feet twice. Once as you're changing your clothes, and once after you change into the new clothes. But the shaila is, when is it happening? For example, does it happen before you call it disrobe, and then you disrobe, go to the mikvah, get dressed, happens again, and then you wash again, or does the washing happen before you disrobe, and then again before you get dressed? So even if you agree that there's a kiddush raglayim on both ends of this process, the disrobing and the redressing, so the shaila just is, where exactly is it placed in that process? So Amalei Rabbanan Rapapa, Umi Matzis Amritachi. So the Rabbanan said back to Rapapa, can you take this position? I was just on yesterday's daf. Tanya, Persu Sudden Shabutz. Mishnah said that they would spread out the linen sheet in between the Kohen and the rest of the people. So the Gemara says, Pashat, the Yarad, the Kohen would take off his clothing, go into the mikvah, Tava va'alag, he would go to the mikvah, immerse in the mikvah, come out, nistapik, dry off. We saw Rashi by wrapping himself in the towel. Heviolo big days of. So we'll say this just, you understand, this is a reference here to the first immersion. They would then bring him out big day zav. Big day zav were the golden clothing. Those are the regular clothing of the Kohen Gadol. The kiddush yada v'raglav, and he would sanctify his hands and feet. So both say, according to Tanakama, the way it's working is, you go to the mikvah, you put on the gold clothing, and then you do kiddush adayim v'raglayim. Rabbi Meir Omer, no. Pashat the Kiddush Yadav Raglav. Now, Rabbi say, here we go. Rabbi Meir holds that when he takes off his clothing. Now, I want to point out. Remember, in the first Tevilah, right, when the Kohen disrobes, what is the Kohen Gadol wearing? What is he wearing? Big day chol. Right, pajamas. Right. He's wearing regular clothing. Right, he's wearing regular. This is not kind of clothing yet. Rabbi Meir, interestingly enough, says Rabbi Meir Omer Pashat v'kidesh yadav v'raglav. So what happens is as follows: he wakes up in the morning, gets dressed in regular clothing, goes to the Shar Hamayim, goes to the mikvah. What does he do? Pashat takes off his clothing, kidesh yadav v'raglav, then washes his hands and feet. Yarad v'tabal, goes to the mikvah, comes out, olav and his stapik dries off. Heviolo big days of, they bring him gold clothing. Lavash, he gets dressed. The kiddush yadav v'raglav, and then he goes ahead and he washes his hands and feet. So Rabbi says, so according to Rabbi Meir, the order is interestingly enough, take off old clothing, kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, mikvah, wear new clothing, and then kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. That's according to Rabbi Meir. To which the Gemara Amalu said to him, Itanya, look, that's not the version of Rabbi Meir we have, but if that's the version you have, then it must be an authoritative version. So says the Gemara, Bishlam Rabbi Meir, Hayno de Mishkachos La'asar Kiddushin. So Rabbi say, listen to this. According to Rabbi Meir, now here's what I want to point out. The major point of contention, as I mentioned before, is there's two issues here. Issue number one is when exactly is Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim done? But the more acute issue right now is there a Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim prior to the first Tevilah? According to the Tanakama, it does not sound like, it's according to the Rabbanan, it sounds like there's no Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim prior to the first Tevilah. Rabbi Meir explicitly says now that what? There is, right? According to Rabbi Meir, change out of his regular ordinary clothing, Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, go to the mikvah, come out, get dressed, big day zab, and kiddush dayim raglayim again. So according to Rabbi Meir, Hainu de Mishkachas asar kiddushin, top of Lamedes. So we'll say, according to Rabbi Meir, who has that first kiddush dayim raglayim, then the number 10 makes sense. We have 10 complete sanctifications. El Rabbanon tishahavu. But here's the problem. According to the Rabbanon, if you count them up, there's only 9 kiddush dayim raglayim, right? Because remember, the Rabbanon do not have that first one prior to the first immersion. What's going on over here? Amar the Rabbanan will say, no, there's another one. Kiddusha Basra. There is one last Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim all the way at the end of the day. Ki Pashet Big Day Kodesh, V'Lavish Big Day Chol Avidle Hasan. But listen to this. The Rabbanan will say there's one more. At the end of the day, when the Kohen Gadol is done with the Avodah, he changes out of the big day. He changes out of the big day, out of the big day kuna. He goes ahead and he puts on his big day chol. And there is one last kiddush yadayim v'raglayim there. Take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Kiddush basra kishe gamar avodas kol hayom poshet big day kodesh v'lovish big day chol avilei hasam kishe ba livshot big day kodesh telididan sviralon kiddush chad apshita v'chad alavisha. So Rabbi say, listen to this. So according to the Rabbanan will say, in the last, when the avodah is over, and the Kohen Gadol takes off his big day kahuna, when he takes off those clothing, with that clothing, he does kiddush yadayim v'raglayim there before he gets dressed again in his own personal clothing. So Rashi ends off over here and says, because according to the Rabbanan, there's chad apshita v'chad alavisha. The way you do it for kiddush yadayim v'raglayim is you wash once when you undress, and wash once when you get dressed. Well, Rabbi Meir, lo mekadesh midi, share'enu balil bosh b'idei kodesh. So we'll say, here's the point of contention. You see, according Rabbi Meir does not hold of that last kiddush dayim raglayim. So Rabbi Meir holds, this is really fascinating. At the end of the day, when the avodah is over, and the Kohen Gadol is taking off his big day kahuna, and going to dress in his big day chol, regular clothing, is there a din of kiddush dayim v'raglayim? The Rabbanon will say, yes. And Rabbi Meir will say, no. Rabbi Meir says the din of Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim is only when you are getting into Big Day Kahuna. But if you're done and getting into Big Day Chol, no Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. So therefore, Rabbi say, they agree, Rabbi Meir and the Rabbanan agree on 9 of the 10 Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. The Machlokes is in number 10. According to Rabbi Meir, number 10, which is really number 1, is going to be all the way in the beginning. All the way in the beginning, in the first thing in the morning, when the Kohen Gadol is undressing from his big day chol, he's about to go into the mikvah, Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. The Rabbanan say no, there's no Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim there. So the Rabbanan's number 10 will be all the way at the end of the day. Kohen Gadol is finished. He's taking off the big day kahuna. He's about to get dressed into his own clothing. Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. Good. So we'll say Tanna Rabbanan. So the good news is the number, Baruch Hashem, the number is going to be the same. Everybody agrees the number is going to be 10. Just machlokes as to when one of them takes place. Beautiful. Tanna Rabbanan. Uba Aaron Elo Moed. Lama Huba. So let's listen to this. When the pasuk says Aaron will come to the Oel Moed, why is he coming? Right? What's the purpose of the century? Now, just to understand the Gemara, look at Rashi. Uba Aaron Elo Moed. Ne'emar Achar Shegamar HaKtoras Umatan Damim Par Visar. So we'll say this pasuk is mentioned after the Ketores service and after the blood applications of the blood of the par and the sayur. So the Gemara asks, Lama Huba, why is he coming back into the mikdash? In other words, he's finished already. He did what he was supposed to do. Look at Rashi. Lama Huba el heichal harei gamer avodosav af b'mikra zelo piresh ma ya'aseh l'sham. So the passage just tells us that Aaron comes into the Beis HaMikdash. But again, or into the Mishkan, but at the end of the day, he already did the avodah, he already did the matan dam, the blood application, he already did the ketores. So why is he coming, quote unquote, back? To which the Gemara says, Lama huba, eino ba'el lahotzies kav ve'es amachta. But say very interesting, to teach me the following, to teach me that halacha l'maisa, by the ketores offering, the way it works is as follows. Obviously, we're going to spend some significant time on this later on in the Masechta, but the Kohen Gadol would go in, remember again, with the shovel, right? I should say the fire pan, which had the coals, and the ladle, which had the ketores. Remember, you're going to both say one of the points of contention between the tzedukim and the prushim, right? Between the tzedukim and the believing Jews was the tzedukim believed that the ketores had to be spilled over the coals outside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and of course, our Masorah is not like that. The ketores is spilled over the coals inside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So interestingly enough, what the Gemara is alerting us to, what Torah is alerting us to, is the Kohen Gadol would go ahead and put the fire pan that now had the ketores on it on the poles of the Aron. We'll see this inside, and he would leave it there. He would leave, and then he would come back later on. So when the pasuk says Uba Aaron Oel Moed, that was to retrieve the ketores, the fire pan of ketores, from the Kodesh HaKadoshim. To which the Gemara says, because in general, in Parshas Acharemos, the avoda of Yom Kippur is generally mentioned in the proper chronological sequence, chutz mi pasuk zeh, with the exception of this pasuk. So my time, well, what's the reason for this? Amar Rav Chisda, Gemiri chamish tevilos va'asare kiddushin tova kohen gadol u'mekadesh bo bayom. So let's listen to this for one simple reason that we've learned before. Going back, this is back to our regular sugya, that the kohen gadol goes to the mikvah, 5 immersions in the mikvah, 10 kiddushin over the course of the day. V'ike sidran. But if the psukim were to be written in the normal order of the avoda, lo mishkachas luhu ela shalosh tevilos. Bishisha kiddushin. You would only find in the order of the psukim 3 immersions and 6 kiddushin. Good. So therefore I will say, the Torah, it's interesting. So the Torah writes the avoda out of order in order to go ahead and safeguard the number, or that we could clearly see the number of tevilos and kiddushin. Very interesting. Tanya, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, minayin lechamish tevilos v'asara kiddushin shetolu ban kohen gadol mekadesh bo bayom. So Rabbi Yehuda says, how do I know? How do we know that halacha l'maisa, the kohen gadol immerses in the mikvah 5 times and does 10 kiddushin, right? From where do I know that? So the Gemara says, Talmud Lomar, Uba Aaron el Oel Moed, Upashat is big de habad, Verachat bisaro b'mayim b'makom kadosh, V'lavash begadav, v'yatza v'asa. So we'll say, listen to this. So we'll discuss this drasha in a bit more depth in just a moment. But now what the Gemara is transitioning a little bit is doing the following. We've established so far that there are 5 immersions in the mikvah, 10 kiddushin. Right? We've established so far that everybody agrees with 10 kiddushin. The only point of contention is when exactly one of them occurs. Right? Remember, again, I want to point out, there's no machlokes regarding 9 of them. There's only a machlokes about we'll call it number 1 and number 10. Right? What's number 1, what's number 10? But again, leaving that aside, Interestingly enough, the Gemara is not trying to figure out, but where does the source for this come from? So Rabbi Huda understands as follows. Rabbi Huda says, Uba Aaron al Omoid, Upashat is big diabas. The pasuk says, Aaron will come to the Omoid, he'll take off the linen clothing, but Achaz b'sarab ma'ayim makom kadosh, he'll literally wash his flesh, he'll go to the mikvah in a sanctified place, v'lavash es b'gadav, he'll once again redress, v'yatza v'asa, and he will go out and do this service. What do we learn from here? Halamarata shekala mishana mi avoda la avoda taun tefillah. I will say what that pasuk teaches us is that, interestingly enough, when you go ahead and shift from one avoda to another, it requires a tevilah. Now we're going to see it's not just shifting from one avoda to another, but it's also what? Wardrobe change. Wardrobe change. That whenever there is, which by the way, we're going to see they're one and the same. They're one and the same. That whenever there's a wardrobe change /a, so just a reminder to shut off your ringers. That ultimately, again, when a person goes ahead and shifts from one avoda to another avoda, ultimately, again, it requires immersion in the mikvah. Amar Rebbe, so Rebbe says, well, so that's Rabbi Huda. So Rebbe says, Minayin lechamish tevilos va'aser kiddushin, shetova kohen gadol mekadesh b'bayom. So we'll say now Rebbe has the same discussion, right? Now, again, here's what's interesting, is we're working a little bit backwards. First, we establish the facts. Well, Gemara often works this way. First, we establish the facts, and then we go in and try to figure out how we know the facts. So we've established the facts, 5 tevilos, 10 kiddushin. Where do we know it from? So Rabbi Huda gave his rasha. Comes along Rebbe. Amar Rebbe. Rebbe says, Minayin lechamish tevilos v'asari kiddushin. How do you know that there's 5 tevilos and 10 sanctifications? Shetol v'kohen gadol o mekadesh b'ayom shene'emar kisones bad kodesh yilbash umichnesei bad yiyua b'saro u'ba'avneit bad yachgar u'v'misnefes bad yitznof bigdei kodesh heim v'rachatz b'mayim es b'saro u'levesham. Shabbos, interestingly enough, Rabbi quotes the pasuk speaking about the unique big day kahuna of Yom Kippur. Remember again, Kison is bad Rabbosai is linen. As opposed to the rest of the year, when the Kohen Gadol would wear big day zav, he'd wear special gold clothing that's very unique to the Kohen Gadol. On Yom Kippur, he wears bad. He wears linen, simple white linen clothing. So Rebbe quotes this pasuk of wearing linen clothing, and then the end of the pasuk says, "V'rachatz b'saro b'mayim u'levesham," and he will go ahead and wash his flesh in water, go to the mikvah, and wear them. What do you learn from here? Halamarata shekala mishana me'avoda li'avoda ta'on tefillah. So we'll see exactly how Rebbe learns this out from that pasuk, because it's not immediately clear what the drasha is, except that the pasuk says that there should be a button on the side. Except just if you, oh, it's not you. No. All right, good. I'm about to say, just if everybody could just check. I'm sorry, much. Looking at you. I owe you a bracha. Kadosh Baruch Hu should bench you and your mishpacha with incredible years of mazel, bracha, and hatzlacha. Amen. So the Gemara says as follows. I'm sorry? It's yours. So the Gemara says as follows. I don't want to say just whoever it is. Mir Tashem Shol have incredible bracha, but please switch it to vibrate. Says the Gemara. Shekal Mashami Avodah Avodah Tam Tvila. So the Gemara says as follows: that whoever goes ahead and goes from one avodah to another avodah requires tevilah. And I both say, so we're going to see exactly where this is, what this is, what the drasha is over here. Because remember, all I go ahead and learn from this is that halacha l'maisa, he has to go to the mikvah. How I know that this means between one avoda and another avoda remains to be seen. V'omer, and the pasuk says, big day kodesh heim. So here's what's interesting. After the Torah goes ahead, and here we go, we get to develop the drasha a little bit more. After we go ahead and we see that the Kohen wears linen clothing, it uses the phrase, Big Day Kodesh Heim. They are Big Day Kodesh, and we learned from here, Hukshu kol habegadim kulon ze lozeh. It teaches us ultimately again that all of the begadim are compared to one another. Right? So all of the begadim are compared to one another. And therefore, I both say, therefore every single time you experience a change in clothing, ultimately, again, you have to go to the mikvah. So what's interesting is as follows. The svara is always the same, which is the change in clothing and change in wardrobe, by definition, necessitates a tefillah and a mikvah. All that's happening over here is Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi are just quoting it from different psukim. The chamesh avodos, and Rabbi say, by the way, this is actually very interesting. There are 5 avodos over the course of Yom Kippur. What are they? Tamid shal shachar, the morning tamid. The big day Zav. And that's done with gold clothing. So remember again, gold clothing is what? The regular, normal clothing of the Kohen Gadol. And the reason you wear that for the Karban Tamid is because, remember, the Karban Tamid is not a Yom Kippur Avoda. That's a daily Avoda, therefore wear the daily clothing. Avoda Sagam B'Big Day Lavan, anything to do with Yom Kippur. Any Avoda of Yom Kippur, by definition, is done with white clothing, linen clothing. Elo ve'ela'am, his ram and the ram of the people, B'Big Day Zav, that's done ultimately with gold clothing. Kaf umachta bebig day lavan. So the retrieval of the ladle and the fire pan from the base, from the kodesh kadashim, done bebig day lavan. Tamid shalbein arbayim bebig day zav, and the tamid shalbein on the afternoon tamid big day zav. So we'll say very easy way to remember it. Anything that's part of the daily avoda, gold clothing, regular everyday clothing. Anything that's part of Yom Kippur, white clothing. Shekol tevila utevila. Uminayin. Shekol tevila utevila tzricha shnei kiddush. And I'll say, how do you know that every immersion in the mikvah requires 2 sanctifications? Requires 2 kiddushin. Talmud lomar upashat v'rachatz v'lavash. So we'll say it's interesting that if you look at the lashon of the pesukim, the lashon of pesukim is upashat v'rachatz. So you'll go ahead, undress, wash, rachatz v'lavash, wash and get dressed. So the juxtaposition of those phrases, upashat v'rachatz v'lavash, kind of rachatz goes in both directions, attaches itself to both parts, teaching us that a rechitza is necessary when you undress as well as when you dress. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon, Omer, Kavachomer. He says there's a Kavachomer. Uma b'makom shein ta'on tevila ta'on kiddush. So let's listen to this Kavachomer. If in a situation where you don't require immersion in a mikvah, you still always require kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Now, I will say, remember again, now what is this referring to? This is the sugi we just had. I will say, remember again, we saw a Mishnah that said every single time you come to the Beis HaMikdash, right, to do the avoda, you must immerse in a mikvah. So we'll say, remember again, we paskin that what's the nature of that immersion? We saw the Rambam, what's the nature of that immersion? Midrabanan. Right? Midda Oraisa, if you're a Kohen and you show up for the avoda, and you know that you're tar, you do not need to go to the mikvah. We happen to paskin like Rabbi Yehuda that it's a srach tvila. No, go to the mikvah when you come to the Beis HaMikdash, because in the event that for some reason you forgot about some type of tumah, you'll go to the mikvah, you'll immerse, it'll jog your memory. But midda oraisa, if a Kohen shows up in the Beis HaMikdash and he is certain about his tar status, he does not require immersion in the mikvah. Now what does he require? Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Meaning you cannot operate in the mikdash. First thing you do when you come to the mikdash and you're reporting for duty is you wash your hands and feet. It says the Gemara, Rabbi Shimon says, it's Kavachomer. If in a situation where you don't require immersion in the mikvah, which is just a stam day in the Beis HaMikdash, when you show up and you know that you're tar, yet ta'on kiddush, makum sheta'on tevila. In a situation where you do require tevila, which Rabbi says, for example, Yom Kippur, where the Torah says explicitly that tevila is required, then ultimately again eino din shetaun kiddush. Then certainly one is going to go ahead and require kiddush adayim v'raglayim. To which the Gemara says ima lahalon kiddush echad avkan kiddush echad. Well, if that's the case again on a regular day, all you have to do is one sanctification of your hands and feet. So by Yom Kippur, I should also only have to do one sanctification. Talmud lomar, uba aron al moed, upashat is big de habar asher lavash. Ma Talmud lomar asher lavash. I will say, why does the pasuk have to say Aaron will come and he'll take off the linen clothing that he was wearing? Why does it have to say that he was wearing? Klum adam poshet elamasha lavash. Does a person take off anything that he's not wearing? Obviously, if you tell me he takes it off, that means that he's wearing it. So why is that phrase asher lavash necessary at all? Ela lahakish pshita lelevisha. Rather, I will say it is coming to go ahead and equate pshita lelevisha. It's coming to equate ultimately again undressing with dressing. Ma levisha ta'on kiddush. Just like when he gets dressed, everyone agrees that he has to sanctify his hands and feet. Af pshita ta'on kiddush. So too when he undresses, it requires kiddush as well. Am Rabbi Yehuda, minayin l'chamish tevilos asar kiddushin shetol v'kohen gadol mekadosh bo bayom. So we'll say now going back to the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda. So we'll say so now we have a machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi. Now the good news is it's not a machlokes about facts, right? The facts are the same, namely 5 tevilos, 10 kiddushin, right? And we also agree that there is kiddush when you undress and kiddush when you dress. Now there might be still a machlokus about exactly the timing, right? How does that work? Is kiddush done before you undress, after you undress? Is kiddush done before you dress, after you dress? Okay, so that we'll iron that out. But the good news is everyone is agreeing on the fact. The machlokes really is the drasha. Right, where are you learning that out from? So the Gemara revisits Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda, minayin l'chamish tevilos asar kiddush shetol bo and kohen gadol or mekadosh bo yom. Rabbi Yehuda says, from where do I know that the kohen gadol does 5 immersions and 10 kiddushin? So the Gemara says, Talmud lomar uba aron elo amoid v'rachat es bisara b'mayim b'makom kadosh. So we'll say we learn from that pasuk. Halamarata shekala mishana me'avoda la'avoda ta'un tevila. So we learn from that pasuk. I will say from the fact that it says that Aaron will come to the Ol Moed and he will immerse in the mikvah. That teaches us that what? Whenever you go from avoda to avoda, it requires immersion in a mikvah. So the Gemara says ashkichan. This is actually very interesting. Ashkichan mi bigdei lavan le bigdei zahav. I only know when you are going ahead and going from Big Day Lavan to Big Day Zahav. That's all I know. When you're going ahead and going from, literally again, the linen clothing to the golden clothing. Me Big Day Zahav le Big Day Lavan minayin. How do I know that even when he's changing from Big Day Zahav to Big Day Lavan, how do I know that that's true? So Tana de Rabbi Yishmael, Kal v'chomer. So we'll say, so the Rabbi Yishmael said it's a Kal v'chomer. Ma Big Day Zahav, Sha'in koin nichnas bahen. Lifnai v'lifnim. Ta'un tevi. Let's listen to this. So the Be'er Shal says as follows. He says it's a Kal v'chomer. What's the Kal v'chomer? When it comes to Big Day Zahav, golden clothing, She'in koin nichnas bahen lifnai v'lifnim. Remember, we're going to discuss this. The Kohen Gadol is not permitted to wear golden clothing into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Now we'll discuss the reason for that is why. There's a concept called Ein Kategar Na'asa Sanegar. The prosecutor cannot become the defense attorney. Gold is always mirames to the Chet HaEgel. Gold always elicits memory of the golden calf. So on the day when the Kohen Gadol is representing Am Yisrael in the pursuit of forgiveness, we do not want to bring up any past collective sin. So therefore, again, when it comes to the golden clothing, the Kohen Gadol never wears that into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Ta'un Tevila. Yet halacha l'maisa, when you go ahead and you put on the golden clothing, you have to immerse in the mikvah. Big Day Lavan, shenichnas b'hen lefnai v'lefnim, eino din she'ta'un Tevila. Then all the more so when you put on Big Day Lavan, which Rav say you can wear into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, certainly requires Tefillah. So we'll say pretty solid Kal v'chomer, right? So again, Kal v'chomer teaches me that if I need it for Big Day Zav, I certainly need it for Big Day Lavan, which halacha l'maisa can be worn into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. To which the Gemara says, Ikal mifrach. One could ask a question. One could ask a pircha on this Kal v'chomer. Mala Big Day Zav shekein kaparasan meruba. We'll say, at the end of the day, it's true. Whereas you are not allowed to go ahead and wear your Big Day Zav into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And on one hand, perhaps you could say that could point to the fact that the Big Day Lavan have greater sanctity. The Big Day Zav still have greater sanctity. Why? Shekaparasa meruba. Because we'll say 364 days out of the year, that's the clothing the Kohen Gadol wears to achieve kapara. So while it's true that on one day the Kohen Gadol can't wear the Big Day Zav in the service, the rest of the year he does. So we'll say that lashon of kaparasan meruba, it affects an incredible amount of kapara. Perhaps that makes that makes the golden clothing more chashuv than the white clothing. So the Kal v'chomer does, which we'll say, so it's like a fascinating idea that you see that on one hand, Big Day Lavan, right, the white clothing, it's the Kohen Gadol's entry ticket into the holiest place in the world on the holiest day of the year, which is incredible. So you would think that makes it more holy. Yet the Gemara says that's true, but the Big Day Zahav is used each and every day to affect kapara besides Yom Kippur? So we'll say it almost begs the question, like from a hashkafic perspective. So what's considered to be a greater accomplishment? Is it a greater accomplishment to do one thing of epic proportions, or is it a greater accomplishment to do smaller things, but to do them each and every day? So isn't that the distinction between the big day Zav and the big day Lavan? Right? The big day Lavan, incredible. It allows the Kohen Gadol entry into the Kodesh HaKadosh, the holiest spot, on the holiest day of the year to perform the avodah of the Ketores. That's great. But the big day Zav allowed the Kohen Gadol ultimately again to function and to do his work and to be the best version of himself each and every day. So which one is more Kodesh? Which one is holy? And I will say, I just want to point out the Gemara argues both sides, but I think a lot of times we think about this even just from our own lives. All of us want to accomplish something great. All of us want to know that our lives mattered. I want to know that I did something in this world. I want to know that somehow my existence was impactful. So how do you measure impact? Is impact measured by accomplishing that one thing that's going to forever change the course? I don't mean to change the course of the world. I mean, but to accomplish that one thing is success measured by that moment of going into the Kodesh HaKadoshim? Is success measured by that incredibly spiritually heroic thing that you did in that one moment? Or is success measured by living a life of sustained growth each and every day? Is success measured by big day Lavan, or is success measured by big day Zav? And again, you see from the back and forth in the Kal V'chomer, there's not really a right and a wrong. It's two sides of the coin. And of course, the real answer is, what's the real answer? Both. Right? The real answer, as I will say, is that remember, the Kohen Gadol wears big day Zav and big day Lavan. That's the truth. So the answer is, of course, we are given those opportunities and those moments to do something dramatic and overwhelming, and ultimately again, but yet, more times than not, we're given the opportunity just to wear big day Zav, to do beautiful, even smaller things day in and day out. Incredible. Says the Gemara, Elenafka le'mid Rebbe. So the Gemara says, rather, it must be that the drasha of Rebbe works better than the drasha of Rebbe Yehuda. Good. Amar Rebbe, minayin lechamish tevilos asar kiddushin. So we'll say now the Gemara goes back and revisits Rebbe's drasha. So Rebbe says, from where do we know that, again, you have to immerse 5 times and do 10 kiddushin? Shadol ban kohen gadol umekadish bo bayom. Tamad lomar kisones bat kodesh yilbash. Ultimately, again, the pasuk says, he shall wear a linen garment. Halamarata shekala meshana me avoda la'avoda sheta'un tvila. So we'll say from here we learn that if halacha l'maisa you change from one avoda to another avoda, that requires tvila. So remember again, this is Rebbe's drasha. Kisonas bad kodesh yilbash, and then remember the end of that pasuk is v'rachat bisaro b'mayim u'levesham. He'll go ahead and immerse in the mikvah and get dressed. So from here Rebbe learns that whenever you shift from one avoda to another avoda, it requires tvila and a mikvah. So ashkichan me big day zav le big day lavan. Shabbos say, I understand, so this pasuk teaches me that Allah, so when you switch from gold clothing to white clothing, you go out and you do mikvah. You immerse. Mean big day lavan, la big day zav minay. But how do I know that when I'm going from big day lavan to big day zav that I have to go to the mikvah? So Tana Devi Rabbi Shmuel Kal V'chomer. It's Kal V'chomer. It's the Kal V'chomer. Ma big day lavan she'in kaparasa meruba tu'unin tvila. When it comes ultimately again to big day lavan. Now I will say here again. Here's the opposite argument. By big day lavan she'in kaparasa meruba. They don't affect a lot of atonement. I will say, what does that mean? It means that big day lavan are only used one day out of the year, and not even for the entire avoda of the day. They're used for the entire avoda of Yom Kippur, but not all of the avoda on Yom Kippur itself. So the majority of the Kohen Gadol's avoda is affected with big day zahav. Yet again, even though big day lavan, which don't affect a lot of kapara, tun and tevila, require immersion in mikvah before we're putting them on. Big day zav shekaparas maruba eino din shetun and tevila. That big day zav, ultimately again, which do affect an incredible amount of kapara, should certainly require tevila. Igel mifrach, but there's a piracha mala big day lavan shekei nichnas bohan lefnai v'lifnim. I would say at the end of the day, big day lavan are different. Why? Because big day lavan are how you enter into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So ultimately, again, because you're able to enter into the Kodesh HaKadoshim with Big Day Lavan, therefore halacha l'maisa, again, perhaps they possess a greater level of kedusha. The Gemara says, "Hainu diktani va'omer Big Day Kodeshim v'rachatz es b'sara b'mayim u'levesham." And this is the meaning of the drush that Rebbe said. It says Big Day Kodeshim, the Big Day Lavan are Big Day Kodesh. Ultimately, again, you will wash you'll go to the mikvah, and then you will get dressed. Good. The chamesh avodos say. So we'll say, so again, it's just the Gemara, all the Gemara did was just repeat the same drushas of Rabbi and Rabbi Huda, go through them a little bit, and explain how each of them arrive at their respective positions through the drushas. But to be clear, the respective positions are the same. 5 tevilos, 10 kiddushin, just a question of the drasha. The Gemara said, the chamesh avodos saying, so remember the Brisa said before, there are 5 avodos during the day of Yom Kippur. What are they? Tamid shal shachar, the morning tamid, big days of, and that's done, Kohen Gadol does that wearing gold clothing. Avodas hayom, the avod of Yom Kippur itself, the big day lavan, that's white clothing. Elo ve'elam, the Kohen Gadol's ram and the ram of the people, the big day zav. Kafu machta, the retrieval of the spoon or the ladle and the fire pan from the Kodesh HaKadoshim. The big day lavan, white clothing. Tamid shal bein arbaim, the afternoon tamid the big day zahav. Uminayin shekol tevilo tzricha beis kiddushin. And how do I know that every immersion in the mikvah requires 2 sanctifications? In other words, both say that every time you immerse in the mikvah, remember when I'm immersing in the mikvah, whenever there's a change of avoda, whenever there's a change of avoda, there's also a change of wardrobe. So how do I know that when I immerse in the mikvah, because of change of avoda, change of wardrobe, that there's also 2 kiddushin, 2 sanctifications, one before, see, the way you could say it is, one before immersion and one after immersion. But again, I know I've said it a number of times, just to say it once more, but then the shaila becomes, when exactly are you doing the kiddush? Is the kiddush done before you undress, after you undress? Is the second kiddush done before you dress or after you dress? So Talmud Lomar, upashat v'rachatz belavash. Because we'll say the pasuk says he shall undress and wash. He will wash and get dressed. To which we're going to say, but one second, hi b'tvilik. We'll say, but that phrase is mentioned in the context of the mikvah. It's not mentioned in the context of kiddush adayim v'raglayim. To which the Gemara says, me'ino inyon l'tvilah dinaf galemi big day kodesh heim. I'll say, if I don't need it for tvilah, because remember again, tvilah, I already learned, because by tvilah it says, big day kodesh heim, v'rachatz b'saro b'mayim. So I already learned the obligation of tvilah from there. So therefore, teneu inyon l'kiddush. Ultimately, again, you could utilize it for kiddush adayim v'raglayim. So we'll say, if the Torah is speaking about kiddush adayim v'raglayim, why does it phrase it as immersion in the mikvah? Why doesn't it use a more specific phraseology to speak to kiddush adayim v'raglayim? Hakamash malon the tvila kiddush. That ultimately, again, tvila is like kiddush. How so? So the Gemara says, ma kiddush b'makam kadosh, just like kiddush adayim v'raglayim takes place in a consecrated part of the Beis HaMikdash. Af tevila b'makom kadosh. So to Rabbi say, immersion in the mikvah must also take place in a sanctified place in the mikdash, with the exception of first immersion, which takes place where? Sharamayim. Excellent. Rabbi Huda kiddush munale. Rabbi say, from where does Rabbi Huda learn out the concept of kiddush adayim v'raglayim? So Naftoli mid Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. He learns from the tradition of Rabbi Shimon, as we said before. Rav Chisda. So we'll say the Gemara says as follows. Rav Chisda says, Had Rebbe's position. Mafka mid Rabbi Meir or Mafka mid Rabbanon. Rebbe doesn't hold like Rabbi Meir, nor does he hold like the Rabbanon. How so? Mafka mid Rabbanon. He doesn't like the Rabbanon. Why not? The ilu Rabbanon Amri kishu lavush mekadesh. Remember again, Rabbi said, going back to the first immersion. According to the Rabbanon, there is no kiddush adayim v'raglayim before the first immersion, according to the Rabbanon. According to the Rabbanan, by the first immersion that takes place in the Sharamayim, there's only one kiddush, and that takes place after the immersion, kishu lavush mekadesh, and that's when the Kohen Gadol. Also, remember again, quick chazara. What is the Kohen Gadol getting dressed in after the first immersion? Excellent, big day zav, because he's about to do what? Tamid shal shachar. Excellent. So we'll say, the Gemara says as follows: that according to the Rabbanon, there's only one kiddush. When he goes to the mikvah, he comes out, he goes ahead and puts on the big day zav and does kiddush v'raglayim. V'ihu, but Rebbe himself says, v'ra'ihu amar kishu poshet mekadesh. Rebbe himself holds that there is a kiddush that happens before the first immersion. That when the Kohen Gadol takes off his big day chol, his own clothing, before he goes to the mikvah, he does kiddush v'raglayim then, and then goes to the mikvah. So therefore, Rebbe doesn't like the Rabbanon. Umafkim Rabbi Meir, but Rabbi also doesn't hold the Rabbi Meir. Why not? Either Rabbi Meir Omer Hach Kiddush Basra Kishu Lavush. Because what Rabbi Meir holds that the way Rabbi Meir agrees that there is a kiddush that's done prior to the first immersion, but I will say by the first immersion Rabbi Meir holds like this: that halacha l'maisa, the way it works, Kohen Gadol goes to the right, undresses, does kiddush, goes to the mikvah, comes out, dries off, gets dressed in the big days off, and then does kiddush. That is Rabbi Meir's position. Ultimately, again, the Gemara says, "V'ihu amar kishu poshet mekadesh," and Rabbi holds ultimately again that Allah Lamaisi does the kiddush actually again before. I'm sorry. I just said that. I said that wrong. But before the immersion, Rabbi Meir holds that halacha lemaisa, the Kohen Gadol does the kiddush adayim v'raglayim ultimately again while he is still dressed in his big day chol. Whereas Rebbe holds that halacha l'maisa, first he takes off his big day chol and then goes ahead and does the kiddush and v'raglayim. Shabbos says, so again, I just want to point out, there's two machloksim unfolding over here. Machlokis number one is the general machlokis by immersion number one. Is there a kiddush adayim v'raglayim that happens prior to immersion number one? That is a machlokis Rabbi Meir and the Rabbanon, and now Rebbe is involved in this also. Rabbanon say no, Rabbi Meir says yes. Then the other machlokis is a general machlokis by kiddush adayim v'raglayim. When does it occur? In other words, even with the tevilos, so we'll say the machlokis is only by tevila number one, but by tevilos 4 through 5, or I should say 2 through 5, everyone agrees that there is a kiddush when you undress and a kiddush when you get dressed in the new clothing. The shaila just is, when is it happening? Does it happen before you undress, after you undress? Then does it happen again before you get dressed, after you get dressed? So we're going to see that machlokes. Amr Rav Acha bar Yaakov, hakomo de kiddush sheni shelo v'shachach mekadesh. So Rav Acha bar Yaakov says, everyone agrees. Everyone agrees. You know what the great part is? Whenever the Gemara says everyone agrees means what? Everyone agrees except those who don't. So Akol Modin, everyone agrees. B'kiddush sheni, shalovish v'achar kach mekadesh. Everyone agrees with the second sanctification. B'kiddush sheni means the sanctification you do after the mikvah. Shalovish, that first you get dressed, and afterwards you do kiddush adayim v'raglayim. My time a damakra, o b'gish ta'al ha-mizbeach, because the pasuk says, when they will come close to the Mizbech, Misheinu Mechusar Elagisha, Yatzazesh Mechusar Labisha Legisha. Because we'll say the idea over here is that after the Kohen Gadol gets dressed in his new clothing, he has to be ready for business, right? He has to be ready for service. There can't be anything else that has to happen in between. So Rabbi Yaakov is suggesting that everyone agrees that halacha l'maisa, for the kiddush that happens after the tevilah, everyone agrees that halacha l'maisa, that ultimately again he gets dressed and then he does the kiddush adayim v'raglayim. So the Gemara says, "Amalei Rav Acha b'rei Rav lo Rav Ashi lo Rav Chista islei Rav Acha but lo Rav Acha islei Rav Chista." Ultimately, again, so the Gemara says, Rav Acha b'rei Rav said Rav Ashi, Rav Chista doesn't hold of Rav Acha, and Rav Acha doesn't hold of Rav Chista. Why not? The Im came the Rebbe, Havulu Chamesar Kiddushin. Because we'll say if this were to be true, then ultimately, again, according to Rebbe, there would be 15 acts of Kiddushin. Okay, so we'll say, so therefore, again, the Gemara just says, like I mentioned before, Rav Acha bar Yaakov wants to make it sound like everyone holds like him. The Gemara is suggesting that's not necessarily the case. So we'll say, so this closes out this sugya. We'll have to stop over here for today. We'll pick up in Meretz Hashem. We'll say we're going to move through the avoda, but we're going to start tomorrow morning. We're going to start with the Rambam. I just don't have time to do it today. We're going to start with the Rambam, where the Rambam in Hilchos Avodas Yom Kippurim is going to go ahead and take us through it. I'm going to send you a copy of it so you can look at it inside, because Rambam does a beautiful job. He doesn't need my approbation, but the Rambam does a very thorough job of taking this entire sugya and solidifying it for us as a solid, comprehensive avodah. So we'll see from the Rambam the order, which we already know the order because that's the Chamesh Avodos. But more importantly, from the Rambam, we'll see how we paskin in a couple of areas. Number one, is there kiddush adayim v'raglayim prior to the first tevilah? We'll see what the Rambam says about that. I don't want to give it away. And number two, how exactly the kiddushin took place. Did they take place before undressing, after undressing, before dressing, or after dressing? and Mir Hashem tomorrow. Shkach, I will say.